Well, it's chilly and rainy and windy outside, so this is a perfect day to do a review on this brand new game from Thin Red Lines, The Fate of All. I've got some replay videos up on my channel, and I think it's time. I haven't seen any video reviews of this, but there's been a lot of activity in the forums on BGG, and there's been some written reviews. But I wanted to put my 2 cents in on this because there's a lot here. First of all, just a little bit of. I'm not an aficionado of Thin Red Lines. I did dabble in a couple of their series, and they're incredible systems and incredible games that they put out, but I just couldn't invest enough time to really get into those systems. I didn't keep them, even though some of them go for quite the resale value online. I'm not a collector, so I can't really afford to sit on games and then sell later to make a big profit off of them, which may or may not be smart, but in this case that's just what I had to do. But when I saw that Fabrizio is coming out with an Ancients game, strategic based, on the Alexander time period, I immediately jumped on board and was eagerly anticipating the release of this. And I'll get it out of the way right now. It hasn't disappointed. But I think we'll take this one step at a time and take a look at the components first before we look at gameplay. As usual, the components of Thin Red Line are very high quality. I might take exception to one thing we'll get to in a second. The box is probably one of the sturdiest boxes you're ever going to see in gaming. I love the artwork on the front. I'm not sure. This is a pretty famous mural or painting of Alexander in action. But that's a pretty famous painting. And let's take a look at some of the other components as far as rule books, charts and tables and whatnot. The rules of play are not extensive. If you take a look at through the main body of rules, is 16 pages. So it's not tons, but it deals with a lot of concepts that are going to be new for people, especially in terms of how you deal with supply in this game. That's a really important factor, as well as how you actually do actions and how that works in terms of gameplay and things that you have to consider as you're playing. But the rules are pretty clear. I think it's interesting, some of the questions that have come up on BGG. First of all, Fabrizio is like a hawk on the forums, in the sense that he's really aware and monitoring the different threads and questions that come up in terms of rules, and some of the justification for a particular rule or how the game works. He's fantastic, and he's got a sense of humor too, which I like. And there's been a couple times, if you take a look at the forums, there's a few questions where it might be slightly unclear, and he said he's going to clarify that in an update of the rules. But I would highly suggest, if you've got this game or you're interested in getting it, to go on BGG and take a look at some of the question threads, because they're very helpful. But I found that most of the time, if I've had a question in the rules, I've been able to find it in here. It's just a matter of kind of digesting some of the rule set, and then getting into the gameplay. It's like any other game that's a good game with a pretty good set of rules, but something that's a kind of a different system. Once you get into the gameplay and start working your way around turns, things fall into place pretty easily. So the rule set is excellent. There are a few pages at the end. I think there's about 8 or so of the tactical combat, and you could ignore all of this. You could have a lot of fun with this game and not do tactical combat. I'm going to get to more of my ideas about that later, but it's not that difficult, especially if you've done GBOH, Great Battles of History. It's not that difficult. There's a few things that might play a little differently, and you'll have to catch on, but it's not a lot of rules if you're treating it separately. My suggestion is to probably do the strategic main part of the game, and then get comfortable with that, and then tackle the tactical combat. I actually did kind of the reverse. I just pulled aside some units and tried to make a couple armies, and then tried the tactical combat out first before I got into a strategic game. But you could do it either way, I guess. I did that because I wanted to see how this worked before I jumped into the whole system. The scenarios and designer notes are fantastic. This is another one of those that, be careful, because it says additional rules. It's not advanced rules, but they are additional rules, but they're not all used for every scenario. So I would suggest it would be easiest, here's the campaign. I started with scenario 1, and then just double check. Instead of having to read all the additional rules, it just tells you which ones are appropriate, which you use for the scenario. So there's just a few, and then go back and read those. But there is a campaign. Scenario 1 only uses 1 map. Scenario 2 only uses 1 map. Scenario 3 has a couple maps, I believe. Yep, A and B. And scenario 4 uses B and D. So you've got 4 scenarios that will use 1 or 2 maps, and then the campaign, which will use all 4. These designer notes, they published online before they actually put out the game, so you can see those online as well. But this is fantastic, and like I said before, Fabrizio is very, very well versed and he well researched this period, and so there are a lot of things I did not know about this period, and when you start reading these designer notes, you'll learn a lot, and also some of the justification for what happens in the game. So those are great. Maps I've taken a look at before in another video, the preview video, but they're typical thin red line maps, fairly big hexes, but they're larger counters as well. But as I said before, that I love the texture look in the hills and the mountains, the trees, even the ocean, which can be pretty boring, just blue water, but you get a sense of waves and texture here as well. So the maps are excellent. And what I really like is the easy delineation between what's what. So very easy to use. The font is a little bit controversial for some people. I think you just have to use it and get used to it. So at first glance, that's a little bit more difficult than some other fonts would be, but I understand what he was trying to do in keeping with the time period. Do double check on a lot of the markings for foraging borders, foraging regions, as compared to actual satraps. So you can see here the dash double dot as opposed to just dotted lines. So double check on that, but they're pretty clear. I think sometimes this gets a little lost. These are foraging numbers. They are outlined in yellow, but still sometimes maybe a little hard to grab hold of visually. Practice your names. They should have a separate book on just name pronunciation for a lot of these ancient cities and regions, satraps, etc. Okay, so maps, excellent. There's 4 of them. The tables and charts. Let's pull back a little bit. This is, you have 2 of these, one for each player, and they are pretty much the meat of the game. This is what I referred to constantly as I was playing. And you're going to have this close by. I suppose after a while, some of the things, for instance, excuse me, these columns, this is probably one of the most important as far as gameplay when you're doing actions and movements. And it's important because each army, depending on how big it is going to move at different rates. And one thing you notice here, if you have a baggage train or a siege train, it would be this equivalent of having 131 plus size points in your army. So you could have a army of, say, 10 size points, but if it has a baggage train, you're going to have to move on this column, and that really slows you down. It's even more important, not more important, but as important, there are a lot of items over here that tell you how many movement points. I think of them as action points. They're called movement points, but each of the leaders are going to get 30 each turn. So this tells you what a particular action will cost. And you can do a lot if you're not disrupted. And that's one of the questions in the game that come up is, what do you do, how much do you do, and how much do you push? So this is a important table. I'd almost have this sheet copied. I might do that. Just have this separately, and then have it out in front of me most of the time. And then you can, you're not going to always need to forage at every turn, although that's a pretty important one. But like this siege, assault, sacking, etc., you're not going to use that all the time. Donation and bribery. So some of these, once you get into combat, yes, this will be big. Just this one is for the tactical combat. So I would say that just a suggestion to make a copy of this sheet and have it separate, and then you can flip through the other sections as you need to. But very good charts and tables. You can play just from that. You don't need anything else. Oh, that's one thing I should mention. I printed out a sequence of play, unless I was missing something. It is in the rule book, but I just printed it out as a separate sheet so I could access that without looking back in there. That would have been maybe nice to have separately. Okay, saving the long-winded one for last. Fate cards, I love the backs. Pretty heavy stock. They're easy enough to shuffle, but there's not tons of them, and you don't use all the fate cards in every scenario. They'll tell you which ones to use. The one thing that the first scenario I played, you have to roll a 10 in order to even see a fate card at the fate step. So I think when I played, they actually only came up twice. And I was anxious to see some of the other ones, but you could take a look at. Now I think for me the black went in, maybe on the video it's harder. In actuality, when I look at them, they're pretty readable, even though they've got this really cool, almost I wouldn't say watermark, but the background is in color. Some people might not like that, but I like the effect. Rather than a separate picture, like text and then a picture at the bottom, I kind of like this. It's different. But it's in black print, so it's pretty. This one's a little more difficult to read, but I like those cards. Okay, counters. Now here's where it gets interesting, and I've got mixed feelings. Okay, first of all, the counters themselves are very, very well done as far as the image on each of them. They're all very distinctive. Each of the types of units, as well as the different allies and sides, Persians, Macedonians, etc. I like that. I again, we get back to this font. This font happens and occurs in the map, and it's on the counters as well. But I just, after a while, I don't think about it anymore. I occasionally, this number, can you read that? That's in white, bottom right. That's actually the size of the unit. And most of them are back printed, so they have steps. But that sometimes gets a little faint. At first glance, you have to look at that carefully. The others pop out well enough. Where I have an issue, and again, if you take your time in separating them properly, it's not going to be that difficult. But at first, and I laid these out, I think in another video. Let's see if I can get a variety here. All right, just as an example, these are all different, and you can see, I mean, in this image, you can see there are different shades, different tints, but they get awfully close, so that may be an issue for some people. They do have the name of the tribe or satrap area where these are coming from. Sometimes they're long names, and so they might be difficult to read. But I have to say, I like the shades. I like the earth tones. I obviously it would have been easier to just have some really bold colors so you can see right away from one unit to the next. But in the long run, the look of the game, I just like the look. And I like the color palette that they used for the counters. Some people may not. And there are some that are much easier to, obviously this pops out quite a bit. So that's, for what it's worth, that's what you're getting for the counter colors. I do want to mention that I think these are a little thin. I don't think there's a need for them to be that thin, in the sense that, yeah, if you don't use the Army or the Force Boxes sheet, let me grab that quick. This is another thing that's really, really necessary. If you didn't use these sheets at all, and I'm not sure why you wouldn't, because it helps keep track of the size of the army, and you can see the leaders. If you got multiple leaders, it's all. So you definitely should use this. But if you're using this, you're not going to be stacking a whole bunch of units one on top of each other. So they're not going to get this enormous stack of units. So I just think they could be thicker. That's probably my one gripe. And part of it is too, I ended up, even though I don't have, it's not very dense as far as the counters being on the map. It's not gonna look like Stalingrad. So despite that, I still ended up using tweezers just to get a better grip. Sometimes like if this is on the map and using plexi, you can see, and I try to keep fingernails pretty short, so and besides I wouldn't want to damage them, but just picking them up sometimes gets to be a little bit of a pain. So if I'm going to say anything negative about this game, I would say thicker counters would be nice. Um, that's pretty minor though. Otherwise, I love the look of the counters and how they look on the map, especially. I think, as far as marker counters, you're not going to use a ton of them. I use the inside the city quite a bit for smaller garrisons. A lot of these colored counters, these are all for tactical combat, so you're not going to use it. Depleted markers for the foraging areas. This attrition stuff, this is strictly for tactical combat. So you could have, I don't know, there's like 3 or 4 bags which you wouldn't use if you didn't do tactical combat. So there's not tons of extra counters you have to be too concerned with. Okay, I think that does it for components. This is kind of nice. And there's one other thing too. This is just a nice overview of the 4 map area, and it shows the satraps. So if you've got any question on looking at the map where the borders are, this pretty much clears that up. One thing to note, that the ocean, or some of these straits that happen in between little points of land, for instance up here, that is a border. It seems pretty obvious. Somebody did have a question about it. So there's actually not any dashed lines to delineate. It's just assume that when you cross that strait, it's in a different satrap or country. And then there's one other, where'd that go? Oh, the Strategicon. Again, great artwork here. This is pretty helpful if you want to just walk your way through. Not tactical combat, but strategic moves and a combat between 2 armies that you would do as part of the main game. So this is pretty helpful. I would double check. There's some discrepancies the way they bring up the armies that they're using here, and then as they go through a typical turn, it doesn't necessarily match up exactly with the scenario. So don't be concerned about that. Fabrizio cleared that up online. Okay, so gameplay. As I hinted at before, this is a keeper for me. I was really disappointed in Imperium Romanum. I actually bought that twice and sold it twice because I wanted to have it work so much, and it just doesn't. It's a larger scale than what this game tries to cover, but I think with the research that Fabrizio did, and the way this sets up, this could be a real go-to for people who are interested in this time period and this type of play in the operational strategic sense. I guess the the best way to talk about why I like this game so much is to talk about what the main body of the game is. There's a lot of things you have to think about. I'm not going to say peripheral, but they're not the things that you do every turn, and they're not the things that you necessarily have to think about every turn. They will affect some of the things that you're going to do and what you're going to act on. But the main body of the game, and where you're going to have spend most of your time, is the campaign phase, faction 1, faction 2. And if you focus even more down to the nitty gritty, it's really the march, fight, and die step. And basically that's one side decides to take a bunch of actions with leaders. Each leader gets 30 MPs to use for that campaign phase. And there's so many options, as you saw with the in the charts. Let's bring that up really fast. You can see the first part is just like how do they move and train, and that it doesn't matter if you have 1 or 100. You're going to have to consult this chart to see how much it takes to move into a particular hex or across a river, etc. But it also entails getting on ships or debarking from ships into ports or on shore. It also covers whether if there's enemy units in the hex. It covers whether you need to move a reaction penalty from a previous turn. It covers removing disruption. It covers how much does it cost when you assault a city. You might spend 10 movement points to get to a city. You still got 20 left. Well, you could assault it. Guess what? If you fail that assault, you can do it again. All of these things are parts of your decision making process as you're moving. You have to make decisions as far as how big of armies do you want to move. Do you want to split them up and risk getting intercepted with one army and being too weak? But it's obviously easier to forage for a smaller army. It's also faster to move with a smaller army. How do you use naval units? One of the things that came up for me was this concept of having a fleet in place that's just there to threaten any other fleet that comes through. So even though maybe it's a little smaller fleet than the one that might be coming by, and maybe they're transporting an army down into this area, that's still a pretty big threat, because if it is able to intercept within its range, they can do a lot of damage, because every time one of those naval steps gets lost, then whatever it's transporting gets lost in a proportional manner. So there's a lot of decisions to be made, both on the defense and on the offense. How much do you risk? I would say that's what I had the most fun in playing this game, is making decisions about risk. And you just have to. You have to commit one way or another and then go for it. Sometimes you can hedge your bets a little bit. Sometimes you have no choice. It's just a really cool process you have to go through as you play each turn. And the thing is, you can't do everything all the time. You're going to have to sit tight and wait a few months. You might have to build up recruits. The way you have to manage your treasury is important. All those things get connected, and I think the way this plays out, it's just it's genius. I cannot say enough about the gameplay in this system. So I'm anxious to see if they take it a step farther and do some other time periods and other parts of the world, in the ancient world, because I would probably buy that in an instant. So again, there's, to sum up, there's some little minor quibbles I have with the counters, possibly the font and the shadings, the subtle differences in between counters. But other than that, this is a keeper, and probably for some people, the price point is going to be and availability now that they've finished that first run. And usually Thin Red Line will put out another print run, and you just have to kind of check on the website and be alert for that. Get on their mailing list, and then you'll automatically get notified. So the price might be a little bit iffy for some people. I guess in my mind, I'd rather, and this is, sometimes you have to get in and play a game, get into it, and realize, maybe it's not for me. And you can always sell it, especially if it's got some resale value. I've done that many, many times, as probably many of you have. But this one has a lot of gameplay in it. I don't think I've scratched the surface. And I certainly haven't set up the campaign or taken a look at that yet. I'm not going to have time for a while. But there's a lot here. And I will say this, if you play one scenario, you could play that scenario several times and discover different things about it. So it's not just the fact that there's 4 scenarios in a campaign game, it's that each one of those is a game in itself. So if you're looking at $160 plus, yeah, that's expensive. But there are some other systems out there and games that get into that price area where I might not play as much, and so it's just not going to be as worth it to me. I'd rather have this one at that price point than 4 other games that cost $50 that I'm not going to play. So you just have to make that decision. Again, if you can get your hands on it and try it out, you can resell it. Even if you're losing a few bucks by doing that and reselling, I still think it'd be worth it if you're interested in this time period and this operational kind of aspect of the ancient world. Let's see, one last comment I have. I have some videos I haven't posted on the tactical combat. I'm not sure if I will. I didn't get very far. I got into a few turns. But let's pull this out. My last comment would be this. The tactical combat system is a decent one, but if you have Great Battles of Great Battles of History, Julius Caesar, SPQR, Alexander, I have those 3, which I've kept and played, not extensively, but gotten a decent amount of playtime out of them. If you have those, I guess I would stick to that system. And if you've got, there's a lot more a lot more interest in the particular historical battles that happen there. And in this, you're not going to get historical battles. You might get some interesting ones. And Fabrizio, it's interesting how they treat having hills, rough terrain, and forest when you switch to tactical. I'm not going to get into that, but it's a little generic. So in my mind, it's not as much fun or interesting as the strategic part of the game, the operational part. If I want to get into the tactical ancients, I'm going to go to Great Battles of History rather than do this. And it would, if you, I will say this, if you try to fight every, obviously you wouldn't do everyone because some of them could be pretty small, but if you fight every major battle on the tactical map, it's going to extend your game playing time quite a bit because it'll take a little bit of time to play each tactical combat. But try it out. Everybody's going to feel differently. And if you don't have Great Battles of History, which I might be surprised at if you're looking at this game, but if you don't, then definitely try the tactical out. Okay, well, I've pontificated enough. Just suffice to say that I really like this game, really like all the components for the most part. Love the way it's put together. And my final comment is Fabrizio is just absolutely fantastic on BGG. So if you've got any questions at all, just post, and usually, certainly within the day, he'll have an answer for you. And like I said before, he's got a great sense of humor, so I appreciate that almost more than anything else. Doesn't take himself too seriously, but he takes this seriously, which is the most important part. So, all right, I hope that helps. If it doesn't, I'm sorry, but that's my thoughts on the fate of all. So give it a try if you get an opportunity. Maybe you know someone who has it, and you can play with them. All right, we'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching.